On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. He paid cash, $20. He carried a briefcase and a paper bag. He was polite, unremarkable, forgettable. He boarded Flight 305, took a seat in the rear of the plane, and ordered a bourbon and soda. The flight attendant would later say he seemed calm, almost bored. 30 minutes into the flight, he handed her a note. She assumed it was his phone number. Passengers hit on flight attendants all the time. She tucked it in her pocket without reading it. He leaned over and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She opened it. The message was simple. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." And with those words, a man who may not have even existed pulled off the only unsolved case of air piracy in American history. The flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, sat down next to him. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to see inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery. It looked like a bomb. She didn't know if it was real, but she wasn't going to risk finding out. He told her his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. He was calm, methodical, even polite. He said if his demands weren't met, he would detonate the bomb. Schaffner walked to the cockpit and informed the captain. The captain radioed Seattle. Within minutes, the FBI was involved. Northwest Orient's president authorized the ransom immediately, $200,000 in $20 bills. The parachutes were gathered from a local skydiving school. Meanwhile, Flight 305 circled above Puget Sound, burning fuel, waiting. The passengers had no idea what was happening. They thought it was a routine delay. In the back of the plane, the man who called himself Dan Cooper sipped his bourbon and waited. He had all the time in the world. 2 hours later, Flight 305 landed in Seattle. The man allowed all 36 passengers to disembark in exchange for the money and parachutes. The flight attendants stayed on board, along with the flight crew. A Northwest Orient employee delivered the ransom: $10,000 $20 bills in a canvas bank bag, and 4 parachutes. Cooper inspected everything carefully. He took 2 of the parachutes and the money, then gave his next set of instructions: refuel the plane, fly to Mexico City, keep the altitude below 10,000 feet, lower the landing gear, and set the flaps to 15 degrees. The crew tried to explain that flying that slow, that low, with the landing gear down would burn fuel too quickly. They'd never make it to Mexico. Cooper didn't care. He said to fly toward Mexico and refuel in Reno, Nevada. The crew agreed. At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again, heading south into the night. Somewhere over the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, Dan Cooper would make his move. The flight crew was ordered to stay in the cockpit with the door closed. The flight attendants were sent forward as well. Cooper was alone in the rear of the cabin. Around 8 p.m., a warning light appeared in the cockpit. The aft staircase, a set of stairs that could be lowered from the rear of the plane, had been activated. Cooper was opening the door. The captain radioed Cooper over the intercom, asking if he needed help. Cooper's response was brief: no. A few minutes later, the crew felt a sudden change in the plane's pressure and balance. Something had left the aircraft. At 10:15 p.m., Flight 305 landed in Reno. FBI agents stormed the plane. The cabin was empty. The aft staircase was still down, swinging in the wind. The briefcase minus the bomb components was left behind. 2 of the parachutes were gone, and so was Dan Cooper. Somewhere over the dense forests of southwestern Washington, in the middle of a freezing November night, he had jumped out of a commercial airliner with $200,000 strapped to his body. And then he vanished. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. They called it NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of agents combed the forests of Washington and Oregon, searching for parachutes, money, or a body. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed the evidence Cooper left behind, and traced the ransom bills. Every bill had been photographed and its serial number recorded before delivery, so if Cooper tried to spend the money, he'd be caught. The FBI was confident. Nobody could survive that jump. It was night, freezing, raining. Cooper had jumped into a wilderness area with no roads, no towns, just endless forest and mountains. He was wearing a business suit and loafers. No survival gear, no cold weather clothing. Even if the parachute opened, even if he landed safely, he'd have to hike out through miles of rough terrain in the dark. The odds of survival were almost zero. The FBI expected to find a body within days. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. No body, no parachute, no money. Dan Cooper had disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed. Then the theories began. Some believed Cooper had died in the jump, that he'd hit the ground too hard, or drowned in a river, or succumbed to hypothermia, and his body was simply never found. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving. Bodies could remain hidden for decades. Others believed he survived. Maybe he was an experienced skydiver. Maybe he'd planned the jump meticulously. Maybe he'd had help on the ground. Some speculated he was ex-military, possibly special forces, trained for exactly this kind of operation. The way he'd handled the hijacking, calm, precise, no wasted words, suggested someone with experience under pressure. But if he survived, why hadn't any of the money surfaced? The FBI monitored banks, businesses, and currency exchanges for years. Not a single bill showed up. It was as if Cooper had jumped into another dimension. The case went cold, but the legend grew. Dan Cooper, misidentified in early press reports as D. Cooper, a name that stuck, became a folk hero. Songs were written about him. Books, movies, TV shows. He was the little guy who beat the system, the outlaw who got away. Then, in 1980, something happened. A young boy named Brian Ingram was on a family camping trip along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was digging in the sand to build a fire pit when he uncovered something strange, rotting, waterlogged bundles of $20 bills. His parents examined them and saw they were old, disintegrating. They reported the find to authorities. The FBI arrived and examined the serial numbers. They matched. It was Cooper's ransom money, nearly $6,000, buried in the sand along the river. The discovery reignited the investigation. How did the money get there? Had Cooper landed in the river and drowned, the money washing downstream, or had he buried it there himself? The bills were badly degraded, suggesting they'd been in the water for years. But the location didn't match the flight path. The Columbia River was miles from where the FBI believed Cooper had jumped. Either their calculations were wrong, or the money had traveled farther than expected. The discovery answered one question. Cooper's fate was tied to the river, but it raised a dozen more, and it remains the only physical evidence of Cooper ever found. Over the decades, the FBI investigated over 1,000 suspects. Some were promising. A man named Richard Floyd McCoy hijacked a plane just 5 months after Cooper, using an almost identical method: bomb threat, ransom, parachute escape. McCoy was caught, sent to prison, and later killed in a shootout with police after escaping. Many believed McCoy was Cooper, but the FBI ruled him out. Witnesses said Cooper was older and McCoy had an alibi for the day of the hijacking. Another suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Orient employee who fit the physical description and had unexplained wealth after 1971. But he died in 1994, and the evidence was circumstantial. Then there was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army pilot with a shady past, multiple identities, and a history of cons. Some investigators were convinced he was Cooper, but Rackstraw denied it until his death in 2019. The truth is, nobody knows. Cooper left almost no evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear photograph. He was a ghost. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. They announced they would no longer actively pursue leads unless significant new evidence emerged. The case file filled dozens of boxes: witness statements, forensic reports, theories, dead ends. It was one of the longest-running investigations in FBI history, and it had gone nowhere. The closure was controversial. Some saw it as an admission of defeat. Others understood the agents who'd worked the case had retired or died. The witnesses were aging. The trail was beyond cold. But the closure didn't end the fascination. Amateur sleuths, podcasters, documentary filmmakers, and investigators continue to dig into the case. New theories emerge every year. Some use computer models to recalculate the jump zone. Others analyze fabric fibers found on the plane. A few even claim to have found the parachute or additional money, but none of it has been verified. The mystery endures. So what really happened to D.B. Cooper? The most likely scenario is that he died. Jumping from a 727 in the dark, in a storm, over rugged terrain, with no proper equipment, it was nearly suicidal. Even experienced skydivers say the conditions were impossible. The parachute he chose was a training chute, not designed for that kind of jump. He had no helmet, no jumpsuit, no way to navigate. He was probably dead before he hit the ground, or shortly after. The money found in the river supports this. He likely landed in or near the Columbia, and his body was swept away, decomposing in the cold water, never to be found. But there's another possibility, one that captures the imagination. He made it. Maybe he was more skilled than anyone realized. Maybe he had help, a Confederate waiting with a vehicle, warm clothes, a plan. Maybe he lived quietly for years, never spending the marked bills, taking his secret to the grave. Some believe he's still alive, an old man somewhere, smiling at the chaos he left behind. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. The legend of D.B. Cooper says something about us. We love a mystery, especially one without an ending. We love the idea of the perfect crime, the outlaw who outsmarts everyone and disappears into myth. Cooper didn't hurt anyone. He was polite, even courteous. He became a Robin Hood figure, even though he stole for himself, not the poor. In the 1970s, hijackings were more common, over 130 in the U.S. alone between 1968 and 1972. But Cooper's was different. It was daring, audacious, and he got away. After Cooper, the airline industry changed. Metal detectors became standard. Passengers were screened. The aft staircases on 727S were modified so they couldn't be opened in flight, a change nicknamed the Cooper Vane. In a strange way, Cooper made flying safer. But he also became immortal. His story has been told and retold, each generation adding new theories, new suspects, new interpretations. He's a Rorschach test. People see in him what they want to see. There's a bar in Washington state that holds an annual D.B. Cooper Days festival. People dress up in suits and sunglasses, drink bourbon, and speculate about what happened. Some bring new theories. Others just enjoy the legend. In 2020, a team of scientists claimed they'd identified particles on Cooper's tie left behind on the plane that suggested he worked in the aerospace or chemical industry. It was a tantalizing clue, but it didn't lead anywhere. The tie is now in an FBI evidence locker, along with the briefcase, the parachute he didn't use, and the few bills recovered from the river. These objects are all that remain of a man who may never have existed in the first place. Dan Cooper was likely a fake name. No one named Dan Cooper matching the description was ever found. He was a phantom, a character played for one night, then discarded. Whoever he really was, he's gone now. Dead or alive, he's beyond reach. The case of D.B. Cooper is a reminder that even in our hyper-surveilled, data-driven world, it's still possible to disappear. In 1971, there were no security cameras, no cell phone tracking, no internet databases. A man could buy a plane ticket with cash, give a fake name, and vanish. Today, that's almost impossible. We leave digital footprints everywhere. But Cooper existed in a brief window of time when anonymity was still possible, when you could step off the grid and never be found. And maybe that's why we're still fascinated. Because deep down, part of us wonders, could I do it? Could I disappear? Could I pull off the perfect crime? The answer for most of us is no. But D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, did. And for that, he's become legend. The man who jumped into the night and never came back. The ghost in a business suit. The only hijacker in American history who was never caught. Somewhere in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, buried under decades of leaves and moss, or at the bottom of the Columbia River, or perhaps in an unmarked grave in a quiet town, the truth waits. Maybe one day a hiker will stumble across a parachute tangled in the trees. Maybe a metal detector will find a cache of rotting $20 bills. Maybe someone on their deathbed will confess, I was D.B. Cooper. Or maybe the mystery will never be solved. Maybe that's how it should be, because the truth, whatever it is, could never be as compelling as the legend. Dan Cooper walked onto a plane with nothing but a briefcase and a plan. He walked off with $200,000 and immortality. And whether he lived or died, whether he was a genius or a fool, he achieved something almost no one else ever has. He disappeared completely, leaving behind only questions. And in a world where everything is recorded, tracked, and analyzed, that might be the greatest feat of all. The mystery of D.B. Cooper isn't just about what happened to one man on one night. It's about the enduring human desire to believe that escape is possible, that the system can be beaten, and that somewhere out there someone got away with it. And maybe, just maybe, they're still out there, smiling.